I can't believe we're finally gonna meet Joe Ziegler. I still have my mint condition of Hitman's rules. Do you think he'll do the Henzo voice?
No way. We gotta see if he'll do mod instead.
Ugh. Well, he hasn't been back to the table in a while. I wonder if he's on a lunch break.
Hey, there's his assistant. Ask her.
Oh, excuse me. We've been waiting a while. Is Mr. Ziegler gonna come back soon?
Let me check. Oh my god! Someone stole Joe Ziegler's head! Joe Ziegler's head was missing. That was what Rick Tater told me when he called me up on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Rick put the con in Comic-Con. He was one of the chief organizers. But getting all this talent in one place wasn't just a labor of love. When I met him next to an authentic Danger Fist Part 1 statue sandwiched between an anime body pillow vendor and a My Tiny Horsey lunchbox display, the guy looked like he was sweating straight gamer fuel.
You gotta find out who did this, Kells. If word gets out that someone stole the head of the handsome and famous Joe Ziegler, it'll be the end of me. I've got way too much money riding on this.
Joe Ziegler, renowned for his work as the lead character in the new grim-dark reimagining of Bambi. Bambi, Fear the Deer, had already made over $30 billion, and Ziegler was the first voice actor in history to win both an Academy Award and the Nobel Peace Prize for his work. All right, Rick, lay it on me. Who might have a reason to want Ziegler's brains sucked out?
Yeah, I got a few suspects. There's Bill Hayes, lead actor from the Danger Fist series. He's been jealous of Ziegler for years, ever since Disney decided the Bambi remake was going to be animated and not live action. He wanted that part so bad he passed up being a lead for a Scorsese film. Yesterday, I heard him say he can't stand how funny, smart, handsome, and talented Ziegler is.
He said that verbatim?
Verbatim? I hardly know him. I didn't even see his new movie.
Other suspects?
Mark McMahon-Hip. He's a D-Tube creator out of Portland. Used to be a huge Ziegler fan until he did the voice of a gay handicapped robot gunslinger last summer. Now he thinks Ziegler's gone woke.
A jealous action star and a man-child with a grudge. Not off to a bad start. Stick around, Ricky. I'll let you know if I need anything. Crime scenes are a lot like any given Comic-Con. A lot of fun, but you're guaranteed to see something grotesque that haunts your nightmares for years to come. News wasn't yet out that Ziegler's head had made like a tree and leafed. His assistant quickly reassured fans he was just practicing lines from an upcoming radio play for his Patreon supporters. I knew who I had to talk to first, and it wasn't gonna be pretty.
I think you're in the wrong place. The kitchen convention is just down the street.
Name's Mercy Kells, PI. I'm here on the investigation of the decapitation of Joe.
Ziegler? Yeah, I heard someone stole his head. Not the first time he's lost it. Did you hear what happened on the set of Antler Mayhem?
No, do you?
Somebody didn't bring him his extra soy frappuccino in time, so he threw a temper tantrum. I talked about it on my channel. We're the #1 largest on DTube in the adult man screaming about comic book movies category. Maybe that's what Tater was in such a hurry to talk to him about.
When did...
Hollywood is obsessed with equality, but we all know equality is just another code word for female-dominated science fiction. That's the only reason they rebooted Star Wars, with a female Jedi so they could pander to the blue-haired SJWs.
I had no idea how much more of this I could take. If he didn't stop talking, I was going to cut off my own head. What a hard case. He loved the sound of his own voice more than a New York rat loved pizza. Aside from his obsession with pop culture, it seemed like his other hobby was hating on it. I knew there was only one way out of the conversation.
That's why Star Wars is woke and...
Who's your favorite Star Wars character, Spock or Captain America? Just as I suspected, he clammed up faster than a clam that had its shell sealed by some kind of clam-related jamming tool. His face turned bright red as he tried to figure out where to begin. Safe for the time being, I moved on. I could hear him swelling behind me as I headed for my next target of interest.
And that's how I learned even a PVC pipe prop axe can still hospitalize someone when used the right way. Oh, thanks for being so patient.
No problem. Marcy Kells, Private Eye. Trying to figure out what happened here earlier. A few folks mentioned you might have an idea.
Oh, you mean poor Joe? I heard someone had stolen his head. I wasn't with him before it happened, though. I just know he'd had a talk with Mr. Tater. Had to have been important.
What makes you think that?
Well, he practically dragged Jim back into his green room.
Did you see them come back out together?
No. I was sending photos with a fan. When I looked back up, the line had formed and I figured Joe must have come back out.
That's odd. If Rick Tater had been with him after his assistant left for the day, why wouldn't he have said anything? Unless... Come with me so we can get to the bottom of this.
Right.
We hit the ground running, dodging past a stand of Spider-Men, a handful of orcs taking photos with Glenda the White Witch, and the absolute best Doc Brown cosplay I'd ever seen. McMahon-Hip's body lay where the head stealer had left it, though about 3 times as swollen since I'd last seen him. Talk about an inflated ego.
What?
Never mind, Lucy, do you know if Billy Hayes had any interactions between Joe Zieja or Mark McMahon-Hip?
As a matter of fact, he spoke to both of them. Although I'm not sure if speaking is the best way to describe it.
What do you mean?
It was more of a fight, with both men. I first overheard him arguing with Joe Zieja when I was in the middle of a boring conversation with that fan dressed in a poorly designed penguin costume. Talk about a cosplay fail. Anyway, the argument got heated when Hayes accused Ziegler of stealing his role in Bambi, Fear to the Air. Told him that he would never be taking any roles away from him ever again and that he'll make sure of it.
Sounds like a threat.
Joe Ziegler didn't seem afraid. He shrugged his shoulders and eventually just walked away. That seemed to piss off Bill Hayes even more. Could be why he then snapped at Mark McMahon-Hip.
Charming guy. With McMahon-Hip decapitated, Bill Hayes was now my prime suspect. It was a little unreal seeing Billy Hayes in person. He looked very different than he did during his prime. It wasn't so much the gray streaks in his hair or the worn-out lines on his forehead, but the miserable, sour expression on his face. There was no more of that charming light in his eyes. He was a man with a grudge.
Joe Zieja was never the right man for the job. He was only cast because everyone thinks he's so handsome, so funny, and his voice makes all the women swoon. If you ask me, he's overrated. The Bambi remake could have been phenomenal if they went in a different direction.
The film received $30 billion.
Only because of Joe Ziegler's name.
And now that Joe Zieja can no longer take your roles, do you think you'll get to make a comeback?
Comeback? The Joe Zieja craze was nothing more than a fad. Even if he stuck around, it wasn't going to be long before the industry chooses a veteran for a full-blown creative renaissance that will shake everything up again.
Either he was good at faking it, or this guy had delusions of grandeur. Excuse my bluntness, but some say you're yesterday's news and out of touch with the younger generations.
The only one who spit out nonsense like that was Mark McMahon-Hip. The guy thought he was some kind of genius in the fandom, as if his opinions could ever lead to a tremendous revolution.
So you don't think what he said about you made any difference?
Not in the slightest. The only ones following his channel are those who fear wokeness will be the end of the world. Little did he know, most of the folks who came out to Comic-Con have way more of a, shall we say, modern outlook. I've been working in the business for a long time, and I know exactly what sells.
The man seemed convinced by everything he was saying that something didn't feel right here. But before I had the chance to get to the bottom of it, Sarah Mellor starred in some of the highest-grossing sci-fi films, making her one of the most talked about and sensational icons. She appeared on covers of numerous magazines and billboards. She was also a Hollywood sweetheart. It seemed unimaginable that anyone would want to take her head off.
I always liked her. We were friends before she was even famous. This is devastating. I was chatting with her about an hour ago. It must have happened not long after I left.
Did you notice any unusual interaction between Sarah Mellor and anyone at Comic-Con?
Only Billy Hayes. They were arguing pretty intensely. Hayes was angry at Sarah because she refused to convince the director of her next movie to cast him. He really wanted the part, and I guess Sarah was unwilling to help. He told her she was making a big mistake and then left.
I had my suspicions of Bill Hayes, but I was questioning him when Sarah was killed. So I don't believe he's the one going around stealing heads. And that confirmed it. Rick Tater's 2 suspects ended up becoming victims themselves, and the real killer was still out there. If we didn't find them soon, more heads would be coming off. But with no leads on suspects and no motive, I didn't have much to go on. Lucy, you said you spoke to Sarah Mellor earlier. Did she tell you anything that stood out or anything that might point us to a possible suspect?
She did say something interesting, actually. I was hesitant to mention this because she confided in me, but seeing as she's gone, I guess I should tell you.
What is it?
Sarah was planning on backing out of her new film deal. She no longer wanted to do the project, but she hadn't revealed this to anyone. I was the first and only person she told.
If no one else knew, there couldn't have been a motive. It certainly wouldn't explain why Joe Zieja, Mark McMahon-Hip, and Billy Hayes were victims. With no other suspects to question, I decided to return to Rick Tater. Maybe he could provide me with more clues. I found Tater in front of the Danger Fist Part 1 statue. He was counting a bunch of dollar bills, and it looked like a handful from what I could see. But as soon as he saw me, he hurriedly put them away in his pocket and gave me a crooked grin. Looks like you're bringing a lot of bacon home.
Yes. The Comic-Con this year's been mighty successful.
Despite heads coming off?
I heard what happened to poor Sarah Meller, and Mark McMahon, and Bill Hayes. Quite unfortunate.
Indeed. But now we know Mark McMahon and Bill Hayes are not our suspects. Which brings us back to square one. We need to find a new suspect and a possible motive. What do the 4 victims have in common? Other than being famous, of course.
Well, they've all pissed off other people. Joe Zieja upset Bill Hayes, and I'm sure others were jealous of him winning the role in Bambi Fear the Deer. Then Mark McMahon's DTube videos have been mocking a lot of the current trends in pop culture. That could make a number of people want to take his head off. And Bill Hayes made his own share of enemies by insulting celebrities because he's no longer the heartthrob.
What about Sarah Meller?
She wanted to back out of her next movie. Maybe it was her director.
It took a moment to realize what I just heard, and it seemed like it took another moment for Rick to realize what he just said. How could you possibly know that?
She told me herself.
When?
This morning.
Morning. She just spoke to Lucy a little more than an hour ago. That was shortly before she must have been murdered. And the only person she told that she was thinking about leaving her next project was Lucy. So the only way you could possibly know is if you overheard them. Which means you were there. And then suddenly, I remembered.
I heard someone had stolen his head. I wasn't with him before it happened, though. I just know he had had a talk with Mr. Tater. Had to have been important. He practically dragged Jim back into his green room. When I looked back up, the line had formed and I figured Joe must have come back out.
That's odd. If Rick Tater had been with him after his assistant left for the day, why wouldn't he have said anything? Unless... it was you! You've been decapitating celebrities! And that's when Rick Tater took off. He ran as if the Indominus Rex was at his heel. I tried to catch up, but he was well ahead. 2 security guards then came by. Stop him! He's the one stealing heads!
Get him!
I got him!
You're the killer that they're looking for?
Is that why you took a handsome amount of cash from that shady guy?
What's this?
He was meeting someone earlier. Looked like in secret.
I was selling the heads to a collector. Happy?
Why?
It makes a fortune. Turns out celebrity heads are worth a lot.
Rick Tater, I knew you were zealous, but I never thought you would go this far. I definitely needed a brandy after this day. Rick Tater was always a savvy guy who could see cash from miles away. He worked all day and night. A little too obsessive, if you ask me. But selling heads to a fanatic collector was not something I saw coming. Still, as I took a sip of my brandy, I felt the satisfaction of having solved another case. Who knew Comic-Con would be MurderCon this year? I can only imagine the headlines tomorrow.